Imagine commanding a battery of artillery guns that had terrorized Europe for 3 years, only to discover that death was racing toward your position at 30 miles per hour. Picture the shock of German gunners who believed their carefully concealed positions were untouchable, suddenly finding themselves under devastating counter-battery fire from weapons they never saw coming. Why did the Wehrmacht's most experienced artillery commanders describe encounters with American M7 priests as their worst nightmare? The answer reveals a revolution in warfare that turned hunters into hunted and transformed the very nature of artillery combat forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For generations, artillery had followed ancient rules. Guns were positioned, camouflaged, and defended by infantry. They fired, adjusted, and fired again from static positions that could take hours to establish and abandon. The side with better spotting, more ammunition, or superior entrenchment usually prevailed. But in 1943, American forces introduced a weapon that shattered every assumption German artillery had held about battlefield survival. The M7 Priest, a self-propelled howitzer mounted on a tank chassis, could deliver devastating fire and then disappear before retaliation arrived. German battery commanders who had survived campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia suddenly found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered, and utterly vulnerable to an enemy that fought by entirely different rules. The transformation began in the sprawling industrial heartland of America, where engineers and military planners grappled with lessons learned from early war reports. Traditional towed artillery, they realized, had become a liability on modern battlefields. Horses and trucks hauling guns moved too slowly, presented massive targets, and required extensive logistical support. When German Stukas screamed down from the sky or panzer divisions broke through defensive lines, stationary gun positions became death traps for their crews. American military doctrine had always emphasized mobility and firepower, but the challenge lay in combining these elements effectively. The solution emerged from an unlikely collaboration between civilian engineers at the Baldwin Locomotive Works and military designers at Aberdeen Proving Ground. They envisioned a self-propelled artillery piece that could match the mobility of armored divisions while delivering the firepower of a standard howitzer battery. The foundation was the reliable M3 Lee tank chassis, already proven in combat but considered obsolete for tank versus tank warfare. Rather than scrapping these hulls, designers saw opportunity. The M3's dependable drivetrain and armor protection could serve as the platform for a revolutionary artillery piece. They removed the tank's rotating turret and built an open-topped fighting compartment that housed a 105mm howitzer, the backbone of American divisional artillery. The resulting vehicle, designated the M7 and nicknamed Priest for the pulpit-like machine gun mount, represented a fundamental shift in artillery philosophy. Unlike traditional guns that required elaborate preparation and defensive positions, the Priest could arrive at a firing position, unleash devastating barrages, and relocate before enemy counter-battery fire could respond. Its armor protected the crew from small arms and shell fragments, while its tracked mobility allowed it to traverse terrain impossible for wheeled vehicles. Early trials revealed capabilities that exceeded expectations. A battery of M7 Priests could displace from one position to another in minutes rather than hours. They could follow advancing infantry closely, providing immediate fire support without the delays inherent in repositioning towed guns. Most significantly, they could engage in shoot-and-scoot tactics that rendered traditional counter-battery procedures obsolete. Factories churning out hundreds of these vehicles monthly. The Priest incorporated lessons learned from British and Russian experiences, including improved radio communications, better optical sights, and standardized ammunition storage. Each vehicle carried enough shells to sustain prolonged engagements without resupply, and the crew of 7 could operate independently for extended periods. The psychological impact of the Priest extended beyond its mechanical capabilities. American artillery crews, traditionally relegated to static positions far behind friendly lines, now found themselves mobile participants in the advance. They could see the immediate results of their fire,
adjust more quickly to changing tactical situations, and contribute directly to breakthrough operations. This transformation elevated artillery from a supporting arm to an integral component of combined arms operations. Meanwhile, German artillery doctrine remained rooted in the successful campaigns of 1939 through 1941. Their guns, primarily towed pieces like the reliable 105mm LEFH-18 and the heavier 150mm SFH-18, had proven devastatingly effective in Poland, France, and the early stages of Operation Barbarossa. German gunners were among the most skilled in the world, capable of precise, indirect fire that could shatter enemy formations at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. German artillery tactics emphasized careful positioning, extensive camouflage, and methodical fire procedures. Battery commanders selected positions based on fields of fire, concealment from aerial observation, and defensibility against ground assault. Guns were dug in, ammunition stocks were cached in protected positions, and elaborate communication networks connected forward observers with fire direction centers. This system had worked magnificently against enemies who fought by similar rules. The German artillery's greatest strength lay in its professionalism and experience. Officers and non-commissioned officers had trained together for years, developing an intuitive understanding of ballistics, weather effects, and tactical employment. Their forward observers were skilled at calling for fire with remarkable precision, and their survey techniques ensured accurate shooting even in rapidly changing situations. Most importantly, they had learned to coordinate with infantry and armor in ways that maximized the impact of their fires. However, this very expertise became a vulnerability when confronted with radically different tactics. German artillery doctrine assumed that enemy guns would also be stationary, predictable, and vulnerable to counter-battery fire. Their counter-battery procedures, perfected through years of practice, depended on sound ranging, flash spotting, and aerial observation to locate enemy positions. Once identified, these positions could be subjected to devastating concentrations that typically silenced opposition batteries within minutes. German gunners had grown accustomed to artillery duels that followed established patterns. Enemy batteries would reveal themselves through muzzle flashes or sound signatures. German observers would plot their locations, and concentrated fire would eliminate the threat. This process required patience and skill, but it was predictable and usually decisive. German artillery had dominated these exchanges in Poland, where outdated equipment made enemy positions easy to locate and destroy. In France, superior training and coordination had overwhelmed French gunners who struggled to adapt to the pace of modern warfare. Even in Russia, where Soviet artillery was numerous and often well-handled, German counter-battery techniques had proven effective. Soviet guns, largely towed and positioned according to rigid doctrine, presented targets that German observers could identify and engage with calculated precision. The pattern was consistent: locate, calculate, concentrate, and eliminate. This methodical approach had served German artillery well across 3 years of continental warfare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Record. They had silenced Polish batteries during the opening days of World War II, overwhelmed French positions during the breakthrough at Sedan, and systematically eliminated Soviet gun positions during the great advances of 1941. Their techniques were proven, their equipment was reliable, and their personnel were experienced. They had every reason to believe that American artillery would present similar challenges and yield to similar solutions. This confidence extended to their understanding of American capabilities based on early intelligence reports. German observers in North Africa had noted that American artillery was well-equipped and numerous, but appeared to follow conventional deployment patterns. Early encounters suggested that American gunners, while enthusiastic, lacked the experience and precision that characterized German operations. There was little indication that American forces possessed fundamentally different capabilities or tactics.
The first hints of change came through reports from German units engaged in Tunisia during early 1943. Forward observers noted unusually rapid American artillery responses and difficulty in maintaining effective counter-battery fire. However, these reports were often dismissed as exaggerations from units under extreme pressure. The established wisdom held that all artillery operated according to similar principles and limitations. German artillery commanders continued to deploy their guns according to proven doctrine as American forces prepared for major operations in Italy and later in France. They selected positions that offered good fields of fire and concealment from aerial observation, established ammunition dumps in protected locations, and prepared defensive fires to protect their positions from ground assault. Their confidence remained unshaken because their methods had never failed against conventional artillery opposition. The stage was set for a collision between two fundamentally different approaches to artillery warfare. On one side stood German batteries equipped with excellent weapons, manned by experienced crews, and deployed according to doctrine refined through years of successful combat. On the other side, American artillery was preparing to introduce tactics and equipment that would challenge every assumption about how guns should be employed on the battlefield. Neither side fully understood what was about to unfold. German commanders expected to face artillery that would behave according to familiar patterns, revealing positions through predictable signatures and remaining vulnerable to systematic counter-battery procedures. American commanders were eager to test their new self-propelled weapons, but had not yet fully grasped how dramatically they would alter the fundamental nature of artillery combat. The transformation would not happen gradually or through theoretical development. Instead, it would explode across the battlefields of Italy and Western Europe as American M7 priests encountered German artillery positions prepared according to traditional doctrine. The collision would prove that warfare's most enduring assumptions could be shattered in a matter of minutes, and that technological innovation could render years of experience obsolete almost overnight. What began as a simple desire to make artillery more mobile would evolve into a revolution that fundamentally altered the relationship between hunters and hunted on the battlefield. German artillery, which had spent 3 years as the predator, was about to discover what it felt like to become the prey. The M7 Priest was not merely a new weapon, it was the harbinger of a new age in which the rules of engagement would be rewritten at 30 miles per hour.
Commanded the valleys and coastal plains where American forces would have to advance. The terrain itself seemed to favor the defense, offering countless opportunities for concealed gun positions and observation posts. German artillery commanders in Italy represented the cream of the Wehrmacht's gunner corps. Men like Oberst Heinrich Weiss of the 114th Artillery Regiment had served through Poland, France, and Russia, accumulating experience that seemed insurmountable to their American opponents. These officers understood every nuance of indirect fire, from the effects of weather and terrain on projectile flight to the psychological impact of precisely timed concentrations. Their batteries were positioned according to principles refined through years of successful operations. The Italian campaign's opening phases seemed to confirm German confidence in their artillery superiority. American amphibious assaults at Salerno and Anzio encountered devastating defensive fires that inflicted heavy casualties and nearly drove the invaders back into the sea. German guns, positioned in caves and reinforced bunkers, poured shells onto the beaches with methodical precision. American forces found themselves pinned down by artillery that appeared both invisible and invincible. However, these early engagements also revealed the first signs of American innovation. Rather than struggling to establish traditional towed batteries under fire, American units began employing their M7 priests in ways that German observers found difficult to understand. Instead of remaining in static positions, these self-propelled guns seemed to appear suddenly, deliver rapid-fire missions, and vanish before German counter-battery procedures could respond effectively.
German artillery officers initially dismissed these tactics as desperate improvisation by inexperienced crews. The conventional wisdom held that effective artillery required careful positioning, precise survey work, and methodical fire procedures. The American practice of rapid displacement struck German observers as wasteful and imprecise. They assumed that American accuracy would suffer from these hasty firing positions, and that systematic counter-battery fire would eventually silence this mobile artillery just as it had silenced conventional gun positions. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong during the American breakout from the Anzio beachhead in May 1944. German artillery positions that had dominated the surrounding terrain for months suddenly found themselves under attack from directions they had never anticipated. American M7 priests, operating in small groups, penetrated German defensive zones and established temporary firing positions that delivered devastatingly accurate fire on carefully concealed German batteries. The tactics employed by American priest crews represented a complete departure from traditional artillery employment. Rather than massing in large batteries for maximum firepower, they operated in small, highly mobile groups that could exploit gaps in German defensive positions. These groups would race to predetermined firing positions, unleash rapid-fire missions based on pre-calculated data, and immediately displace to alternate positions before German counter-battery fire could respond effectively. The speed of these operations shocked German defenders who had grown accustomed to the deliberate pace of conventional artillery exchanges. Traditional counter-battery procedures required time to identify enemy positions through sound ranging or aerial observation, calculate firing data, and coordinate concentrations. By the time German batteries could respond, the American priests had already moved to new positions, often several kilometers away from their original firing points. German artillery officers found their most reliable tactics rendered obsolete almost overnight. Sound-ranging equipment that could precisely locate stationary gun positions proved useless against targets that fired briefly and then vanished. Aerial observers who had successfully directed counter-battery fire against fixed positions discovered that American artillery left no permanent signatures for targeting. Flash-spotting techniques, perfected through years of practice, could not keep pace with guns that appeared and disappeared within minutes. The psychological impact on German gunners was profound and immediate. Artillery crews who had spent years as hunters suddenly found themselves the hunted. Positions that had seemed impregnable became death traps as American shells arrived from unexpected directions without warning. The careful defensive fires that German batteries had registered to protect their positions became irrelevant when the threat materialized from multiple directions simultaneously. American M7 priest crews, meanwhile, discovered capabilities they had never fully appreciated during training. The combination of mobility, armor protection, and immediate fire response allowed them to operate in ways that seemed impossible for traditional artillery. They could advance with assault troops, providing immediate fire support without the delays inherent in displacing towed guns. They could exploit temporary advantages in terrain or enemy dispositions, delivering critical fires at decisive moments. The technical specifications of the M7 Priest proved ideal for this new style of warfare. Its maximum speed of 24 miles per hour on roads allowed rapid movement between firing positions. The 105mm howitzer, while smaller than many German pieces, could deliver high-explosive shells with sufficient accuracy and lethality to neutralize enemy positions. Most importantly, the vehicle's armor protection allowed it to operate in forward areas where towed guns would have been vulnerable to small arms and artillery fragments. American artillery doctrine began evolving rapidly to exploit these capabilities. Fire direction centers learned to prepare multiple firing solutions for anticipated positions, allowing priest batteries to occupy new locations and begin firing within minutes of arrival. Communication procedures were streamlined to reduce the time between fire requests and rounds impacting on target. Ammunition resupply was reorganized to support units that might displace several times during a single engagement. The transformation was not without challenges. American crews had to develop new skills in rapid deployment, camouflage, and tactical movement that went beyond traditional artillery training. Maintenance procedures had to account for vehicles that might cover hundreds of miles in combat operations rather than remaining in static positions. Command and control systems had to adapt to artillery units that operated more like armored formations than conventional gun batteries. Despite these challenges, American artillery units quickly embraced their new capabilities and began developing tactics that maximized the M7 Priest's advantages. They learned to coordinate with armored spearheads, providing continuous fire support during rapid advances. They developed techniques for engaging targets of opportunity, taking advantage of their mobility to attack enemy positions from unexpected angles. Most importantly, they learned to survive and thrive in the fluid environment of modern mobile warfare. The success of these new tactics became apparent during the American advance toward Rome in June 1944. German defensive positions that had withstood months of conventional attacks crumbled under assault by combined arms teams that included M7 Priests operating as integral components of the advance. American artillery was no longer confined to supporting roles behind the main battle line. It had become a primary weapon system capable of independent tactical action. German resistance in Italy, while fierce and skillfully conducted, began showing signs of strain as traditional defensive methods proved inadequate against American mobile artillery. Battery positions that had been carefully selected and fortified became untenable when subjected to rapid, accurate fires from multiple directions. Communication networks that had functioned effectively against traditional artillery barrages became overwhelmed by the sheer volume of fire requests generated by American combined arms teams.
Effectively against conventional threats were disrupted by American units that could appear anywhere within their operational area. The campaign in Italy served as a testing ground where both American tactics and German countermeasures underwent rapid evolution. However, the fundamental advantage lay with the Americans, whose M7 Priests could adapt more quickly to changing conditions than German artillery locked into defensive positions by terrain and doctrine. The stage was being set for an even more dramatic transformation when these refined American tactics would be unleashed on the battlefields of Western Europe. As American forces prepared for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, their artillery had been transformed from a traditional support arm into a highly mobile striking force capable of independent action. The M7 Priest had proven its worth in the mountains of Italy, but the open terrain of France would provide the perfect arena to demonstrate the full potential of self-propelled artillery. German defenders, meanwhile, continued to rely on methods that had served them well in previous campaigns, unaware that they were about to face an opponent that had fundamentally redefined the rules of artillery warfare. The morning of June 6, 1944, brought with it the largest amphibious invasion in human history, and for German artillery positions along the Norman coast, it marked the beginning of their greatest nightmare. As American forces stormed ashore at Omaha and Utah beaches, German gun batteries that had spent months preparing defensive fires found themselves facing an enemy that refused to follow the established rules of engagement. The carefully plotted killing fields that had served German defenders so well in Italy were about to become graveyards for their own artillery positions. Oberst Friedrich Kellner commanded the 352nd Artillery Regiment, positioned in fortified bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach. His guns had been registered on every possible landing zone, ammunition stocks were abundant, and his experienced crews had practiced their defensive fires until they could deliver devastating concentrations with mechanical precision. The bocage country behind the beaches offered perfect concealment for his reserve batteries, while forward observers in concrete bunkers could direct fire with unobstructed views of the invasion beaches. For the first hours of the invasion, German artillery performed exactly as doctrine prescribed. Kellner's guns poured shells onto the American landing zones with murderous accuracy, turning sections of Omaha Beach into hellscapes of exploding sand and torn metal. American infantry hugged the shingle, unable to advance against the precisely coordinated fires that swept the beach approaches.
German radio networks crackled with target assignments and ammunition expenditure reports as battery after battery added its weight to the defensive barrage. However, as American forces began to push inland, the nature of the battle changed dramatically. Rather than the slow, methodical advance that German defenders had anticipated, American units began moving with unprecedented speed and coordination. Most disturbing to German artillery observers was the appearance of enemy guns that seemed to materialize from nowhere, deliver rapid-fire missions, and vanish before counter-battery procedures could eliminate them. The first indication of the revolution underway came when Kellner's forward observers reported accurate American artillery fire falling on German positions that had been carefully concealed from aerial reconnaissance. The shells were arriving with precision that suggested direct observation. Yet, no American forward observers had been spotted in the immediate area. More puzzling still, attempts to locate the firing batteries through sound ranging and flash spotting yielded positions that appeared empty when German counter-battery fire arrived. American M7 Priest batteries had begun employing tactics refined during the Italian campaign, but adapted to the unique terrain of France.
Normandy. The dense hedgerow country that characterized the bocage provided perfect cover for rapid movement and concealment. Priest crews would advance along sunken lanes, invisible to German observation, occupy firing positions for brief periods, and withdraw before their locations could be plotted by enemy observers. The psychological impact of these tactics on German artillery crews was immediate and devastating. Gunners who had grown accustomed to fighting from prepared positions found themselves under attack from directions they had never anticipated. Battery positions that had been selected for their defensive advantages became death traps as American shells arrived with no warning and from multiple angles simultaneously. The methodical procedures that had served German artillery so well in previous campaigns collapsed under the pressure of an enemy that struck without pattern or predictability. Hauptmann Werner Schultz commanded a battery of 105mm howitzers positioned in a grove of apple trees 3 kilometers inland from Omaha Beach. His position had been carefully surveyed and camouflaged, with predetermined defensive fires registered on all likely avenues of American advance. On the morning of June 8th, his battery was engaging American infantry attempting to advance through a gap in the German line when Schultz heard the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery shells. The first salvo landed with devastating accuracy directly among his gun positions. Before his crews could react, a second volley arrived from a completely different direction, followed immediately by a third concentration that seemed to come from yet another angle. In less than 3 minutes, Schultz's battery had been virtually eliminated, with 3 of his 4 guns destroyed and most of his crews killed or wounded. Most shocking of all, his sound-ranging equipment had detected no enemy muzzle blasts, and his observers had seen no muzzle flashes that would indicate firing positions. What Schultz could not have known was that he had been targeted by a coordinated attack from 3 separate M7 Priest platoons operating according to new American tactics developed specifically to counter artillery. The first platoon had approached through a hedgerow-lined lane, occupied a firing position for less than 2 minutes, delivered its mission, and immediately displaced to a secondary position nearly a kilometer away. The second and third platoons had simultaneously fired from positions selected to create the illusion of a much larger American battery, while actually employing only 12 self-propelled guns. The speed and coordination of this attack represented everything that German artillery had not expected from American forces. Traditional artillery tactics would have required extensive preparation, careful positioning, and methodical fire procedures that would have given German observers ample time to locate and engage the enemy batteries. Instead, the American attack had materialized and concluded before German counter-battery procedures could even identify targets for engagement. Similar attacks were occurring throughout the Normandy sector as American forces employed their M7 Priests in ways that German doctrine had never anticipated. Battery after battery of German artillery found itself under accurate fire from enemies they could not locate, engage, or escape.
The static defensive positions that had served German forces so well in previous campaigns became liabilities when faced with an opponent that could strike from any direction and disappear before retaliation arrived. The German response to these tactics revealed the limitations of their traditional approach to counter-battery warfare. Artillery officers like Kellner began dispersing their batteries over wider areas to reduce vulnerability to concentrated fires, but this dispersion reduced their ability to mass fires effectively against American attacks. They attempted to establish roving gun positions that could displace after firing, but their towed artillery lacked the mobility to execute such tactics effectively. Against opponents moving at 30 miles per hour, German efforts to adapt their tactics were hampered by fundamental limitations in equipment and doctrine. Their excellent artillery pieces were designed for accuracy and range rather than mobility, requiring extensive setup time that made rapid displacement impossible. Their communication systems, optimized for coordinating fires from fixed positions, struggled to maintain contact with units attempting mobile operations. Most critically, their trained personnel lacked experience in the rapid decision-making required for mobile artillery operations. American M7 Priest crews, meanwhile, were discovering capabilities that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. The combination of mobility, firepower, and protection allowed them to operate in ways that seemed almost supernatural to their German opponents. They could advance with infantry assaults, providing immediate fire support without the delays inherent in positioning towed guns. They could exploit temporary gaps in German defenses, delivering critical fires at decisive moments when traditional artillery would still be calculating firing solutions. The technical advantages of the M7 Priest became more apparent as the Normandy campaign progressed. Its ability to fire from unprepared positions meant that crews could engage targets of opportunity without the extensive survey work required for towed artillery. The vehicle's radio equipment allowed constant communication with forward observers and fire direction centers, enabling rapid response to calls for fire. Most importantly, its armor protection permitted operation in forward areas where conventional artillery would have been vulnerable to small arms and mortar fire. These advantages were multiplied by American innovations in fire direction and ammunition supply. Fire direction centers began preparing multiple firing solutions for anticipated positions, allowing Priest batteries to occupy new locations and commence firing within minutes of arrival. Ammunition resupply was reorganized around mobile replenishment points that could support units operating far from traditional supply lines. Communication procedures were streamlined to reduce the time between target identification and shells impacting on enemy positions. The transformation of American artillery doctrine during the Normandy campaign was remarkable in its speed and effectiveness. Units that had landed with conventional tactics were rapidly adopting new methods that maximized their equipment advantages while exploiting German weaknesses. Officers and enlisted men alike demonstrated remarkable adaptability, developing techniques through trial and error that would have taken months to perfect under peacetime conditions. German artillery commanders found themselves fighting an opponent that seemed to violate every principle of effective gunnery. American batteries appeared to fire from positions that offered poor fields of fire, deployed without adequate time for survey work, and displaced before completing their missions. Yet these apparently amateurish practices were achieving results that German professionals found both inexplicable and devastating. The reality was that American artillery had developed beyond the limitations that constrained German thinking. The M7 Priest's mobility meant that fields of fire were less critical because positions could be changed rapidly to engage different targets. Survey work became less important when vehicles could move to positions offering direct observation of targets. Mission completion took on new meaning when batteries could continue their fires while displacing to new positions. As American forces broke out of the Normandy beachhead in late July 1944, German artillery found itself facing a crisis that threatened the survival of the entire defensive system. Battery positions that had anchored German defensive lines for weeks were being eliminated faster than they could be replaced. Personnel losses among artillery units were reaching catastrophic levels as experienced crews fell victim to attacks they could neither predict nor counter. The German High Command's response to this crisis revealed their failure to understand the fundamental nature of the threat they faced. Rather than recognizing that American artillery had achieved a qualitative superiority that required new defensive methods, German officers attributed their losses to temporary tactical setbacks that could be remedied through traditional solutions. They called for more camouflage, better counter-battery techniques, and increased air support to locate American gun positions. These solutions, while sensible within the framework of conventional artillery warfare, were inadequate against an opponent that had transcended conventional limitations. Better camouflage was irrelevant when American batteries never remained in position long enough to be located. Improved counter-battery techniques could not engage targets that disappeared before firing solutions could be calculated. Air support was increasingly unavailable as the Luftwaffe struggled to maintain any presence over the battlefield. The human cost of this transformation was becoming apparent to both sides, though in vastly different ways. American M7 priest crews were discovering that their tactical advantages came with new risks and responsibilities. Operating in forward areas brought them under direct fire from German infantry weapons. High-speed movement over rough terrain resulted in mechanical failures that could strand crews in enemy territory. Most significantly, their success made them priority targets for every available German weapon system. German artillery personnel were experiencing losses that exceeded anything in their previous combat experience. Veteran gunners who had survived campaigns across Europe found themselves helpless against an enemy they could neither see nor effectively engage. Battery positions that had provided security and protection became death traps where experienced crews perished without the opportunity to fight back. The psychological strain of facing an invisible, invincible enemy began affecting morale and combat effectiveness across German artillery units. The Battle of the Falaise Packet in August 1944 demonstrated the full maturity of American mobile artillery tactics and their devastating effect on German forces. As German armies attempted to escape the collapsing pocket, they found every road and trail under accurate artillery fire from American batteries that seemed to anticipate their every movement. M7 priest units, operating in close coordination with armored spearheads, established blocking positions that trapped entire German formations in killing zones where escape was impossible. Oberst Hans Dietrich, commanding the remnants of 3 artillery battalions during the retreat from Falaise, later described the experience as unlike anything in his military career. His guns, which had provided effective fire support throughout the Normandy campaign, were eliminated one by American counter-battery fire that seemed to arrive instantaneously whenever his batteries attempted to engage. His attempts to establish defensive positions were frustrated by American artillery that could engage his guns faster than they could be emplaced and camouflaged. Most disturbing to Dietrich was the realization that his experienced crews, trained according to the finest European military traditions, were helpless against opponents who seemed to fight by entirely different rules. His sound-ranging equipment could not locate American batteries that fired and moved before their positions could be plotted. His forward observers could not direct effective fires against enemies who never remained in position long enough to be engaged. His communication networks, optimized for coordinating defensive fires, could not adapt to the fluid conditions created by highly mobile American artillery. The technological gap between German and American artillery had become qualitative rather than merely quantitative. German guns were often superior in range and accuracy. German crews were generally better trained in traditional gunnery techniques, and German fire direction procedures were more precise under ideal conditions. However, these advantages became irrelevant when the fundamental nature of artillery combat had changed beyond recognition. American M7 priests were not necessarily better guns than their German counterparts, but they were weapons designed for a different kind of warfare. Their mobility allowed them to exploit temporary advantages that would disappear before towed artillery could be positioned. Their armor protection permitted operation in areas where conventional guns would be vulnerable. Their integrated design eliminated the coordination problems inherent in systems composed of separate prime movers, guns, and ammunition carriers. The psychological transformation of both armies was as significant as the tactical revolution. American artillery crews had evolved from support personnel operating behind the main battle line to combat soldiers integral to every phase of offensive operations. They developed confidence, born of tactical superiority and technical advantage, knowing that they could engage any enemy and survive encounters that would have been impossible for conventional artillery. German artillery personnel underwent an opposite transformation, from predators to prey, from confident professionals to desperate survivors. The skills and experience that had made them formidable opponents in previous campaigns became liabilities when applied against enemies who fought according to different principles. Their training, equipment, and doctrine were all optimized for a kind of warfare that had become obsolete almost overnight. The implications of this transformation extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation in Normandy. American success with self-propelled artillery was inspiring similar developments in other armies and other weapon systems. The principle of combining mobility, firepower, and protection was being applied to tank destroyers, anti-aircraft guns, and even rocket artillery systems. The age of static, position-dependent warfare was ending, replaced by fluid operations where victory belonged to forces that could move, shoot, and communicate faster than their opponents. German military leaders were beginning to recognize that they faced not merely a tactical problem, but a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare itself. Their response, when it came, would be too little and too late to affect the outcome of the current campaign. The infrastructure, training, and equipment needed to match American capabilities would have required years to develop and deploy. By the time German industry could produce self-propelled artillery in meaningful numbers, the war would be decided by other factors. The human cost of this technological and tactical revolution was becoming staggering. German artillery units that had begun the Normandy campaign with full strength and high morale were being reduced to scattered survivors within weeks of first contact with American M7 priests. Experienced officers and non-commissioned officers, the backbone of German military efficiency, were falling at rates that could not be sustained by any army. American casualties among M7 priest crews were significantly lower, but still substantial. The aggressive tactics that made them so effective also exposed them to risks that conventional artillery could avoid. Vehicle losses due to mechanical failure, enemy action, and accidents were higher than anticipated. The psychological stress of continuous forward deployment affected crew performance and morale. Most significantly, the success of American mobile artillery made its crews priority targets for every German weapon system that could reach them. As summer gave way to autumn in 1944, the revolution in artillery warfare had fundamentally altered the balance of power on the Western Front. German defensive lines that had relied on artillery fire for their effectiveness were collapsing under pressure from American forces whose own artillery could not be effectively countered. The methodical, professional approach that had characterized German artillery operations was being overwhelmed by American innovation and tactical flexibility. The M7 Priest had proven to be more than just a mobile gun. It was the harbinger of a new age in warfare, where mobility, communication, and rapid response would determine victory or defeat. German artillery, trapped by its own excellence in traditional methods, was discovering that yesterday's solutions had become today's vulnerabilities. The hunters had become the hunted, and the transformation was irreversible. The final phase of this artillery revolution would play out across the battlefields of Western Europe as American forces advanced toward Germany itself. Every engagement would demonstrate the growing gap between mobile and static artillery, between forces that could adapt and those constrained by traditional methods. The age of the self-propelled gun had arrived, and with it came a transformation that would reshape military thinking for generations to come.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.